Hello, and welcome to the first Genome Space Orientation webinar and Recipe Resource Introduction. I am your host, Sarah Garmsegi, and your co-host and chat moderator is Felix Wu. We will spend most of the webinar today going over a presentation about how to use Genome Space, recipes, the recipe resource, and how to add your own recipes. And at the end of the webinar, we'll be answering questions from the chat. So if you have any questions for us as we're going through the presentation, please ask them in the chat, and we'll be answering them at the end. If you cannot access the chat, it is this chat icon that should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So just as an introduction for people who are just starting out with Genome Space is a platform for integrative genomic analyses. The goal is to teach non-computational biologists and clinicians how to use bioinformatic tools and how to do these common bioinformatic analyses. It is a connection layer between different tools, so you can do an analysis in tool number 1, send it through Genome Space to tool number 2, and continue with the analysis. And cloud storage makes all these tools and all the data resources available from any location using Dropbox, Google Drive, and Amazon. Currently, we have 20 tools connected in Genome Space, including tools for visualizing data, analyzing data. We also have workflow tools, and we also have some data resources. For today's webinar, we'll be using 2 tools. The first is an online analysis and workflow platform called GenePattern, and the second tool is a desktop tool for analyzing and visualizing network data called Cytoscape. So just to get started, Genome Space has sort of 2 major components. The first is the website. This is genomespace.org, and you will see a navigation menu here, login and registration buttons, different social media options such as news highlights and a Genome Space blog and a Twitter feed. And the other component is the Genome Space User Interface, or GSUI, which you can access using the User Login button. Once you have logged in to the GSUI, there are a couple of different components here as well. One of them is the navigation bar, so this provides different ways to download data or manage your Genome Space account, and also links to different documentation that we have on the Genome Space website as well. Another component is the toolbar, so this is the place where you will find all the Genome Space tools. You can scroll, all 20 tools are currently in here, and you can scroll using these arrows at the end. You will also see a directory view, so this is a directory of a user and the Google Drive account connected for that user, data that has been shared to that user, and public data. And finally, there's the file system view, which has components such as the actual files that you're looking at and your different folders and things like that. So this will look very similarly to the file explorers that you should have on your own personal computers. So recipes are building blocks of analytical research. They are short, standalone workflows which document the necessary steps to complete a common bioinformatic analysis. They use between 2 to 3 tools or data sources, and the idea is that we're trying to build a bioinformatics laboratory manual, which will help guide people through common bioinformatic analyses, and the different recipes can be strung together to create larger recipes. The recipes are housed on the recipe resource, which can be accessed either by going to recipes.genomespace.org or by clicking the recipes button. If you click that button and go to the recipe resource, you'll see a web page that looks like this. And this recipe resource also has 2 major components. The first is the front page. This provides a lot of information about what recipes are, a navigation menu, extra documentation related to recipes, a place to browse, and a place to read featured recipes and contribute recipes and interact with the community. And the other component is the list of recipes themselves, which can be accessed either by browsing or by clicking on the list of recipes, list recipes. So now we'll do a live demo of the recipe resource. So here is Genome Space. So again, this is the navigation menu, and you can log in using this button. If you log in, you'll see a page that looks like this. So again, these are the different tools that are available, and this is the file view. So this is the recipe data user, and they have different folders and different files in those folders. And so this is the recipe resource. As you can see, I'm currently logged in as the user recipe data. This login credential is the same as for Genome Space itself, so those user accounts are connected. This is the navigation menu. This cloud icon will return you to genomespace.org. The house icon is the front page link, so this will return you to this page that we're currently looking at. My recipes, if I click on this, this takes me to all the recipes that I have created and all the recipes that I have favorited. And you can favorite recipes by upvoting them. And we'll come back to this later to demonstrate how to create a recipe. And finally, this menu it illustrates a couple of different documentations that are available on the Genome Space website. So this is the same navigation menu as you would find on the main Genome Space website. So in order to demonstrate browsing, I'm just going to return to the main front page. And again, here I can browse recipes if I'm interested. I can search for recipes with gene expression, or if I just want to list all recipes, I can click on this List All Recipes button. So this is what the recipe list looks like. There are 13 recipes total. Each recipe has a title box, and in this title box there will be an icon illustrating the different tools that are associated with this recipe. So you can see that this tool in particular uses Galaxy, GenePattern, and then Genomica. There's also a link to the recipe itself, and then there's also this button to expand information about this recipe. So now we're looking at a summary of the recipe, including a workflow diagram which illustrates in general what the workflow is for the recipe, including the input data, the analysis that is being done in these different tools, and the expected output. And it also lists the questions that this recipe is trying to answer. And also we list the different tags that the recipe is tagged by, the number of upvotes and downvotes, the number of steps, and again, the tools that are involved in this recipe. So if you weren't sure what those tool icons were, they are always listed in the recipe. This cloud icon indicates official Genome Space recipes that the Genome Space team has contributed, but we really encourage our users to contribute their own recipes. So we like to denote which ones are the official recipes. If you would like to compare more than one recipe, you can expand all the recipe descriptions, or you can expand just particular recipe descriptions. So let's say I want to examine these two recipes. I can read about them and then collapse them if I'm finished reading that summary. So the other component to this web page is the filtering of recipes component. So recipes can be filtered by a couple of different categories. There's analysis type, data type, all the tags that are available, and tool type. And this will update dynamically. So let's say I'm interested in gene expression analysis. If I select that, this list is updated to list the recipes that are tagged with gene expression analysis. In the event that I'm interested in alignment, I can just click to alignment and I get the different recipes. Within one category, this is an OR function. So if I'm interested in any recipe that has alignment or differential gene expression, I can select both of these and I will get all the recipes that have either alignment or differential gene expression. In particular, this recipe filtering, you can either use a control click in order to click more than one, or you can also use a shift click to click multiple. Between categories, it is an and search. So if I would like to find all recipes that are alignment and galaxy, in this case there's only one of these recipes, but this would be selecting alignment and galaxy. If I select more than one in this category, now I'm looking for all recipes that are associated with an alignment analysis type or a differential gene expression analysis type and galaxy. So you can see both of these have the galaxy icon. Both recipes use galaxy. So now just to demonstrate how to use recipes themselves. So we're going to clear this. So we're going to be looking at this particular recipe, find subnetworks of differentially expressed genes and identify associated biological functions. You can see if you click on the recipe, you again have that icon, so we know this is using GenePattern and Cytoscape. We see the author and the date that the recipe was published, and we can see that it is an official Genome Space recipe. We see the different tags associated with the recipe and the different votes. So you can see that I have upvoted this recipe, and that's why it's one of my favorite recipes. There's also a navigation menu, which will travel with you as you scroll down the page, and it provides shortcuts for the different parts of the page. If a recipe has a video or a video playlist, that will be the first thing to show up. So if I were to click this, I would be moving through the different video playlists. In case you are more of a visual learner and you would just prefer to watch someone walk through the recipe, you can watch those videos. Next, we provide a summary of the recipe, which again has this workflow diagram illustrating what the different inputs and analysis and outputs are of the recipe, as well as a description of what's going on. We have a section for input, and this is where we are listing not only a description of what the input data is, but also where you might be able to find the input data in the event that Genome Space is hosting that data. There's also an output section, which will list the expected output. The way that recipes work is they are a guide to the user. So if you are interested in running a recipe with your own data, you can definitely do that, but be aware of the fact that the parameters may change and that the outputs may change. So this is just a guide where you can follow along, and if you do exactly what the guide says, you should get the output that is expected. We also have an overview of the different recipe steps, which are categorized by the gene type. So you can see that we're going to complete 5 steps in GenePattern and then another 4 steps in Cytoscape. So these are the individual recipe steps. I'm just going to collapse this for a moment. You can see that there is a title for the recipe step. There's also a short description of what the recipe step is. So if you're familiar with these tools, you can just quickly read them to find out exactly what you want to do. Or if you are interested in the details of the recipe, you can expand these steps and get the minute details of how you should go about doing these different steps. You can also expand all the steps or collapse all the steps. And at the very, very end of the recipe is the results interpretation section, which lists the output of the recipe as well as our interpretation of what those outputs mean, including figures or screenshots of the different tools that are being used. And at the bottom of the recipe, there's also a place where you can submit comments. So if you have any questions about a particular recipe, if you have any suggestions for how to improve the recipe or perhaps one of the tools, the menus have changed and it needs to be updated, please feel free to comment and let us know. So now we will do a live demonstration of how you would use a recipe. And the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to have the recipe on one half of the screen, and I'm going to have Genome Space on the other half of the screen. We will make this a little bit smaller so that we can see all of the steps. So step one is loading data. Here we want to load data into GenePattern using one of the following three methods. So we're going to pick method number 2, which is that we click on a particular file, this normal_lu.gct, and in this case, we know from the input that we need to go to public, recipe data, expression data, and we can find that normals_lu.gct file. And then we want to click on that file and find the GenePattern icon. And now we'll click on GenePattern, click Launch, and this will send that file to GenePattern. So next, I can see that I want to use preprocessed dataset. So this is a module that will filter out any genes that are not differentially expressed in this dataset. So I can click here, scroll down, and I find preprocessed dataset, then I can click Submit. So now I'm using the GenePattern tool to complete this analysis. And this is the preprocessed dataset module. You can see here there are a lot of different options. It has preloaded my file into the input file name option, but there's a lot of other parameters that I could potentially change. So since I don't know exactly what I should do, I'm going to expand this step, and I'll be able to see a screenshot, which is highlighting exactly what I need to change in order to run this module. So I can see here, the only thing that's highlighted is this input file name, and I've already changed that. So now I can click Run. So as that runs, we'll start the next step. I can see that I need to use comparative marker selection. So I will go here to this module section, and I will start searching for comparative marker selection. And then I will click on that module, and it should look very similar. Zoom out a little bit. It should look very similar to the screenshot that I have here. So based on this, I can see that there are two files that I need to change, the input file and the CLS file. And the input file, based on this description, I can see is the previous job's output. So if I go to the Jobs tab, I can see that this is still running, but we actually ran this earlier today. And so we already have that prepared. Oh, it just finished running. So we'll grab the one that just finished running, we'll click it and drag it to input file. And then the next file is the CLS file, which I know because reading through this, I know that this will be in Genome Space. So now I can click on the Genome Space tab, I can click on Public. I have to scroll down to find recipe data. And then expression data. And then normals_lu.cls, and I can click and drag that. And I can see that I only have those two parameters to change, so now I can run this job as well. The next module will be extract comparative marker results. So I can switch back to modules, and I can start typing extract comparative marker results. You can see that module here. And based on this descriptive text, I can see that it's the output of the previous job. So again, I switch to Jobs. And then when this is finished running, I'll be able to click and drag one of those output files to this comparative marker selection file name. But meanwhile, we have dataset file name, which I can see is this normals_lu.preprocessed.gct file. And we already have that from the previous job. So I can click and drag that to the second parameter, and this .comp.marker.odf to the first parameter. And now I can see that there are definitely other parameters I need to change. So this recipe is asking that statistic be set to rank. So I will change this parameter to be set to rank. And then in this particular case, we want the top 50 genes extracted from this list. So here I will type 50. And those are the 4 parameters that I've changed that match the recipe. So now I can click Run. The next step would be to run Select File Matrix. But in our case, to save on time and also to demonstrate a new way to do this, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sending the file straight back to GenomeSpace. So what we would normally do is use the Select File Matrix module to extract just the gene names from the file and send the file back to GenomeSpace so that we can send it to Cytoscape. Instead of doing that, we will just send it straight to GenomeSpace and then use GenomeSpace to extract those different gene names. So we already have one of these output files. This is that same job that we ran earlier, and we will eventually get a normals.lu or normals_lu.preprocessed.comp.marker.built.gct file. So here's our new one. You can click on that file, the GCT file. A menu will slide out, and you can click on Save to GenomeSpace. And here I will select my directory, recipe data, and click Select to send that to GenomeSpace. So now if I return to GenomeSpace, I should be able to see under my own directory that we have that file sent. And now what we're going to do is we're going to extract the top 50 genes. So the way that we'll do that is right-click on the file and choose Extract Rows and Columns. So we can see here, make this bigger. You can see here, this is a preview of that file. And what we want to do is start using these particular gene names in this column. So what we'll do is we'll toggle that column. So this is selecting only the values in this particular column. And the other thing that we want to do is we want to start at row 4, because that's where the gene names start. So we'll change the Start at Row parameter to 4. And we know that we want top 50 genes, so we'll add an extra 50 to the end of that. And then we'll click Save, and this should extract out those particular gene names. And it will be named with a .slice. So now if we preview this, we see that all we have is a list of gene names. We have our top 50 genes. So next we're going to start using Cytoscape. And before we showed you how to launch an online tool by launching the tool on a file. And the way that we'll launch Cytoscape is we'll just launch the tool itself. So we can click on the Cytoscape icon. And this will download, since Cytoscape is a desktop tool, this has to download a JNLP file to run. And so we actually already have Cytoscape queued up. What will happen is you'll see a cytoscape.jnlp file downloading. You may see some Java security warnings that can be ignored. And then eventually you will see Cytoscape. So this is the Cytoscape tool. I'll just close these so this is easier to see. And Cytoscape is a desktop tool. So in the interest of time, we're not going to go through the entire Cytoscape analysis process. But what we'll do is, if we compare this to the recipe that we're using, so here we're loading data into Cytoscape. The recipe indicates that we should go to this particular menu, File, Import Genome Space, and then Load Network from Table. So that's what we'll do. Click on File, Import, Genome Space, and then load network from table. And so we can see here, this is actually connected to a different directory at the moment. But if we find under public, we find recipe data. We should, so in this case, the Cytoscape ended up being connected to a different user account. But we have a previous one here, so we should be able to click on that slice file and then click select. And then it will import everything into Cytoscape. So now we will, let's see what our recipe says. It says under source interaction, we need to choose the column with our G names. So it's column number 1. And you can see now it's highlighted all those G names. And there are a couple of different options as well if you import the gene names in a different way. In case you have header information, maybe you chose the correct column, but you forgot to tell the row to start at row number 4, and so you have some header information. There's also ways to remove that information in Cytoscape so you load only the gene names. But in this particular case, all we need to do is change this column to be column number 1, and then we can click import. And we can click close. So now we have our genes imported into Cytoscape as nodes. And so the rest of this recipe will describe how to identify interacting genes within this group of 50 genes, and then within that, how to build a network, and then how to find subnetworks within that network. And the reason we won't be doing that today is because it involves using GeneMania, and in order for people to follow along at home, then we'll have to download a lot of data from GeneMania in order to run it. So we'll skip this step for now, just in the interest of time, but you can see how you would use a recipe and sort of use it to help you follow along and do the correct steps in the tool itself. And again, you are welcome to use your own data in order to complete these recipes, but just be aware that the parameters might be different. And once we complete this recipe, we'll be able to see a network of those 50 connected genes, and we'll be able to find particular networks, subnetworks of interest. So next, you might want to know, how do we create our own recipes? So the way that you do that is you can click on My Recipes. And here I already have a recipe that I've created. I haven't submitted it to the recipe resource yet. I will show you how to do that today. But in order to start your own recipe, you can click the nice big Add a Recipe button. There are some fields that we require, and they're marked with an asterisk. So here, for example, you can type, so this is I'm typing recipe data, example recipe. This is my example title for my recipe. If I have a YouTube video that I would like to be associated with my recipe, I could cut and paste that URL here. You can also use Vimeo, or instead of a video, you could also use SlideShare as well. So this link that I just clicked on is the best practices for creating recipes. So this is available on the home page. If I return to the home page, it's here under the recipe resource guide, best practices for creating recipes. This is the guide that tells you what the different titles should mean, your video URL information, all the nitty-gritty details of how to create recipes and what our different standards are. So if I return back to my recipe, I'm going to choose not to upload a video at this time. I can choose a title image. The title image is an image with those icons of the different tools that are associated with the recipe. For now, I will also ignore that. Tags, you can type tags. They will automatically come up with existing tags. And then you can use a comma to denote these different tags. we require you to have a summary section. We also require the input section. The input section should list not only what the example data is, but how you could get the example data. So in the Genome Space official recipes, Genome Space will host them on the recipe data user account, and so we'll provide information about how to get to them. In the event that you want to host your own data, you could use, for example, Dropbox or Google Drive to make that data available, or you could share it publicly in your own Genome Space folder. Outputs are optional, in particular because some recipes require, some of them do not have a particular output or endpoint. They might have a visual output, or they might have just a list of genes as the output, but we do appreciate having a descriptive output. And then next, I'll add a recipe step. So the recipe steps are added separately. Here I'm adding step number 1. Again, you can have a video URL that's specifically associated with that step. You need to pick a particular tool to go with that recipe. So I'll pick Cytoscape for this particular step. You can see that all 20 tools are available in here. You can add a short description. When the recipe steps were collapsed, we had a couple of sentences briefly describing what each step did, but this is not required. However, we do require content for each recipe step. And so here should be the information about what parameters you might want to change when you're running a particular tool or module, or the details about what that recipe is trying to accomplish. If it's converting a file format, if you're doing a complex analysis, all those details should be in here for people to follow along. If you want to modify the text, you can do things, for example, like you can use this widget here to bold certain text, italicize. You can add screenshots. For example, you can use a URL if you already have it saved somewhere else. You can also upload from your local computer. You can also add an alternative to a recipe step. So an alternative is a situation where two tools can accomplish the same thing. So for example, if you want to do RNA-seq analysis, you could use TopHat, for example, to do an alignment. TopHat is available both in GenePattern and in Galaxy. So this is an alternative where you might tell someone, you might write in your recipe, I want to use Galaxy, but then you might also write down the directions for using GenePattern in case someone is more comfortable using that. If you decide that you don't want a particular alternative step, or if you don't want a particular recipe step, you can click the red X to delete the step. And it will give you a warning. You can click OK. So here I've created my recipe step. And let's say I've decided I don't actually like this too much. I don't want to have a recipe with detailed steps in it. I'm just going to delete this. And the last part is the results interpretation. And this is the part where you might write down what the output is of your recipe, what you expect users to get if they follow along. And now we have two options now that we've created our recipe. We can either save our recipe for further editing, or we can submit the recipe for review and publication. Saving the recipe for further editing will just create the recipe, whereas submitting the recipe for review and publication will actually submit it to the recipe resource, at which point the Genome Space recipe team will review the recipe, make sure it's not spam or otherwise offensive, and if it meets our guidelines, then we will release it to the public, so then it will be publicly shared. So I'm going to quickly check over and make sure I have all the required details, all the sections with an asterisk. I have recipe, data title, tags, I have my summary, inputs, some outputs, and an example. So I'm going to submit this recipe for review and publication. Now this is not a particularly good recipe, so it will probably be rejected. But now if I go to my recipes section, I can see here I have a recipe that is now pending review. My other recipe that I created previously is only in the created status. And so once this recipe is accepted or rejected, the status will change. So that's the introduction and the demonstration of the recipe resource and of how to create and use these different recipes. And again, if you have any questions, we will be addressing them shortly. If you want to know how to use the recipe resource, best practices for creating these different recipes, or otherwise our community guidelines, all of that information is available on the front page under this recipe resource guide.